Energy Manager in the sustainability team. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about climate risk and adaptation today. So the first thing we know is that climate change is real. We have evidence that the climate is changing, that it's getting hotter and that it's getting wetter and a number of other scientific facts. We also know that we can see that in terms of the way it impacts our trust itself. So we know that there are things like Thunder Thursday where we had ridiculous amounts of rain, and we've had very hot summers recently, that the hottest ever recorded, and that's impacted the number of patients that are admitted to hospitals, and it also has an effect on the how we can react to those within the trust. So we know that there are studies on the impact on climate on the human body and how that affects our health. And these are all things that we are adding up. So over time, these are getting progressively worse. So the evidence is that this is not only a climate threat, but it's also a health threat. So that we're taking it obviously very seriously. There are impacts on all sorts of things. So it not only impacts on our patients' health, but the number of admissions that we get and how well we can cope with those. It also impacts on our ability to deliver care. So if people can't get to the hospital or we can't get paramedics to people, that has major impacts on basically people's likelihood of surviving an incident. So if we move on from that, so just to summarize, we know climate change is real. We know that it's happening. We know that it impacts all of us, but also that it's unpredictable. We can't say that it's going to be sunny in July because as part of this change, that the whole world is in flux, and there's a high degree of uncertainty, other than that it's getting worse. So we need to prepare for this, and our approach to this as a trust, our approach so far has been that we put together a team of people. We worked individually quite a lot to start with, so we created our own plans, we created our own ideas of what the risks might be. We put together, as I say, plans and a team of people within the trust that could come together and help to identify those risks and to try and plan to mitigate and avoid as much as we could. Um, our next approach was to say, well, it's great doing it in isolation, but we also have a lot of shared experience with people that have had flooding affecting their trusts. So we pulled together a team and we organised workshops to pool that knowledge so that we could all benefit. There's been 3 workshops in the series that we've done. We've done the first 2 and we have the 3rd one coming up. So the first workshop worked on looking at the likely changes and the impacts they might have. So we try to identify all of the possible risks in all of the different areas that might affect us, and to put some sort of measure on that. So what the size of the risk would be, and what the scale of the risk would be. So the likelihood of it happening and the consequences if it did happen. That allowed us to then score each of those things collectively as a group, and to come up with an idea of which were the most likely things, which were the things we had to address first, so that we could come up with a plan, which took us nicely onto creating a tool. So we created something in Excel that helped us to plan and helped other trusts to go through the same process. The second workshop that we did took us the next stage on from that. So now that we know what all of those risks might be and how they might affect us, it was to say, well, what can we do to reduce any of those risks and to mitigate them and to adapt to the ones we couldn't. So we looked at things like the likelihood of things happening, the consequences, how to avoid it, and if we couldn't avoid it, what those residual risks would be. We looked at things like uh, preparedness and a response action. So having sandbags available if we needed to put them in somewhere. So we might not know where we're going to flood, but we know that it's likely that we will. So having those sandbags ready is a good step. We also looked at mitigating factors. So could we put in flood barriers and defences, for example, against harsh weather, flooding and that kind of thing. But also could we put on films on a window so that the sunlight wouldn't get in to make the water so hot. Some of the other really simple things are to say, well, if we can't mitigate those things, if we can't reduce the temperature in our operating theatres because there's not technology to do that, can we simply move the hours that we open? So being open earlier in the morning when it's cooler, or later at night when it's again cooler, and avoiding that peak in the middle of the day where it's just too hot for doctors to be wearing all of the things that they need to wear to make the patient safe. Which then took us on to the sort of third of those workshops, which is to look at the next stage on, and part of that is supplier resilience. So we're only as strong as the weakest link in our chain, so we can do all of the things internally that we can do. We can stock whatever we need to stock, we can change our hours, but ultimately there becomes a point where we need to rely on our supply chain to make sure that they're doing their bit to get all of those things to us that we need, and that can be both products and services and support. In very much the same way that we kind of consider climate change and carbon accounting to be scope 1, 2 and 3, we can think of that supply chain as scope 3. So we've looked very closely at what we can do within our own scope of 1 and 2. We're now moving on to that next scope, which is where we need your help. And we really are from our position as a trust, we have both upstream and downstream things that we need to consider. So one is supply chain, but the other is that we're almost a hospital of last resort. So while other hospitals that are smaller have the ability to close the doors to say we simply can't cope with these conditions, as an anchor hospital, we're not allowed to do that. We have to stay open. We have to support the patients where other people can't cope with those things. So in lots of ways, it's not only our supply chain, it's the supply chains of those people that may feed into us if that situation arises. So there's a degree of flexibility that we need to have within that. Which brings us nicely onto the question of what we need to do is to start to ask you guys what you're doing and what your plans are, so that we can have confidence that not only we as a trust are resilient, but all of the people that form part of our kind of wider picture are also just as resilient. And we know that we're better together, so we know that if we're all doing something, then we can pull together and be stronger. And what we really need to think about is to do this in a way that is joined up thinking. So it would be much better for us if, for example, if people are stocking different elements of stock outside of the region that we could bring in, that they're all in the same place, that we're not going to 10 different places, we're going to sort of one localized source if we can do that. There are lots of different ways that we could do that. So one of the things that we're at this point we'll need to look at is, do you guys need some help? And if you do, we're having roundtables later on, so you can come and ask us about it, but also talk to us about the longer term things, what things you're struggling with, what things we might be able to help with. And if you have a solution, so if you've found things that you've put into your own supply chains that really work, then we also want to know about those. So talk to us, let us know what you're doing and any of the solutions that might help other elements in our supply chain. Because at the end of the day, what we need is a robust set of plans that work, so that we can not only protect ourselves and our supply chain, but also our patients, and make sure that they're safe and that they adapt and are able to go on with life in a normal way, as uninterrupted as possible, despite the changes in climate that we are now coming. That covers my 15 minutes. Thank you.